Aloha and welcome to Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute. It's my delight today to have a friend I've known since graduate school. We've been sparring partners, if you will, in terms of philosophical debate. He's a philosopher, a professor of philosophy at the Hawaii Pacific University. But more than that, in addition to being an academic, he's someone who's taken a real interest in the everyday world you and I live in, and he's throwing his hat into the ring and running for public office. My friend today is going to talk with me a little bit about philosophy and politics and different views that we hold. Please welcome to the program Professor Matt Lopresti. Matt, aloha.
Aloha. Thanks for having me, Keli'i.
Oh, delighted. I mean, did you imagine back when we were studying for our PhDs that you and I might actually be involved in something practical?
Actually, I hoped that I would. One of the reasons I went into philosophy is I thought that ideas have to have traction in the world.
Well, a lot of people say philosophers are so heavenly minded that we're of no worldly good.
I've heard that before, more than once. But I really feel committed to the idea that ideas matter in the world.
And sort of like someone whom we may not want to be identified with, who said, philosophers have tried to explain the world, but the point is to change it.
Fair enough. I like that, yes.
So you're a teacher, you're a researcher, your background is in both Western and Asian philosophy, so we've got a lot in common.
That's right.
How did you decide to throw your hat into the ring and get involved in running for public office?
Well, for me personally, it was a journey through philosophy. It was a journey through starting a family, through becoming a homeowner and becoming more and more invested in the society around me and having my family and my job affected increasingly by government and by the decisions that were being made for me.
In other words, you came out of the ivory tower where you had been studying with your books and everything, and you saw having a home and a family meant that you deal with the economy at the rawest level. The government is involved in that, and you wanted to do something about it.
Yeah, I mean, we really need, I think, more people who have greater critical thinking abilities. There's so many absurd things that you see happening in government, and a lot of it is the result of the process, but also a lot of it is, in some cases, a result of bad leadership.
Sure. Now, you're a well-informed citizen, no doubt about that, but what would you say Confucius or Lao Tzu or Plato and Aristotle, what would they have to contribute, if anything, to being in public office today? The average person may not quite get that.
I don't think they do get it, but they have everything to contribute to it, because it's thanks to them that we have the systems that we have. It's thanks to them that we have the values that we have, and we have really the system of government that we have. The idea of obligations or duties for people to be involved in society. These aren't just somewhere that come out of the blue. They come from other people who thought great thoughts and wrote them down and taught others over centuries. And they're the great ideas that we've inherited.
Well, I would like to think that when someone assembles the skills that we look for in political leaders, that at least one of those skills would be the ability to think rationally and to apply wisdom to age-old problems.
Ideally, yes. I remember when I first threw my hat in the ring, as you said, I spoke with some colleagues about, wouldn't it be great if we had more academics in politics? And that was the reaction, was laughter. Interestingly enough, with philosophers in particular, I think over the ages, reading the great books, you see a lot of disdain for politics. And I understand that, and I've shared that. But there comes a time where you have to act. There comes a time where there's the opportunity and the obligation to get involved.
And philosophers have really been at the forefront of identifying some of those themes that have driven society forward. Democracy, equality, the rights of anyone to address power, and all of that. Those are major philosophical themes.
Absolutely, and liberty. I mean, these are things that I teach every semester. Where did these ideas come from? One of the classes that I teach, we look at the roots of contemporary global ideologies. We study Confucius, we study the Hindu texts, we study Islamic political philosophy, and we study the birth of Western liberalism in the Age of Enlightenment. And we look, where do these ideas come from? And they come from a specific view of what it means to be a human being. Part of what that means is how you live in relationship with your fellow man and society. And the definitions that we come for who we are affect the kind of society that we develop. And those are different. And there's a lot of misunderstanding between cultures even today. And at the root of that is misunderstandings of basic human values and basic ideas about what it means to be a human being.
Absolutely. Now, there are a lot of values that you and I share, and certainly foremost amongst them is the importance of rationality, the importance of thinking issues through, so that power or tradition or religion alone are not, or what my parents say, are not telling us how to live our lives, but individuals use their minds and they think. And you and I have benefited from probably some of the most comprehensive education on the planet,
Absolutely.
in terms of tools on how to think. But we don't line up everywhere the same place, and I wonder if we could address that a little bit. I know that
Sure.
that you and I don't necessarily subscribe to labels to describe everything, but they're useful to point a direction.
Yeah, and I want to touch on
Yes.
something before we
Go
actually
ahead.
get to that, if that's right. You know, the idea that we have been exposed to this great opportunity to have a higher education, have a PhD. You know, I feel that one of the reasons more people should get involved who are highly educated is they have a duty, they have an obligation back to society. You know, there's the idea of the noblesse oblige, where if you're a wealthy industrialist or something like that, you're have a duty to give back to society, to help out society. And I think that there is a parallel when you have a high education, that you have a duty to be a public intellectual. You have a duty to be involved and to testify as an expert on things.
Absolutely.
And not just sit on the sidelines. That would be as selfish as a rich man holding him or herself up in their mansion and not being engaged with society. What an even greater waste for a great mind with such high education and ability to do the same. So the more highly educated people we have involved in government, I think the better off society is.
Well, I'm in absolute agreement with you there that there is a giving back. One of the most valuable things that we have received from our families and our society is education.
Yeah.
And so you and I are involved in giving it back to students, and we're also involved in using some of those tools we have to help public policy makers make better public policy.
Exactly.
Now,
But yeah, let's go back to your...
there are various words that describe positions that people take from time to time. Some may use words like progressive and liberal to describe where you're at, or conservative and libertarian where I'm at. When you hear those words, and feel free to abandon them or enhance them in any way, how accurate are they in terms of describing what you actually believe and why you believe it?
Well, Keli'i, it always depends on the context. If you're talking on national politics, the word liberal or progressive means something quite different when you're talking, I think, on a local context or even in a classroom. By and large, I am more liberal, I am more progressive. I embrace that because it is an emphasis on individual liberty and self-determination, and the idea that we have a duty to one another to help each other. And one of the ways we do that is not just individually, but also through shared governance of society. So that's, you know, those are labels that I don't shy away from. Somehow they become bad words when you disagree with something, but I think that's a result of our society moving further and further away from open critical dialogue, where we can disagree on issues like you and I do, but still be respectful, sit down and have a real conversation.
Well, there are a handful of rubber hit the road issues where you and I take different points of view, but in terms of what you just said, the importance of liberty, the individual liberty, and protecting that and enhancing that, that's something that libertarians or conservatives believe absolutely. In particular, one of the things we hold to is the importance of the Constitution, that liberty is protected and defended by law, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, and that in many ways this liberty has to be protected for the individual against his own government. I'm wondering if you'd parse that any differently.
No, that's classical liberalism, and that's one of the ironies is, and I was just talking with my class about this last week, talking about what does it mean, what does liberalism mean? And a lot of people don't realize that even conservatives today are liberals in the classical sense.
Well, I think a lot of people use the term liberal in a social issues sense.
Yes, today they do.
Where one may stand in terms of how high a hem length or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Social issues defines one as being liberal or conservative. But really, if we take a look at a longer swath of history, swath of history, that the concept of liberal, classical liberal, has more to do with belief in liberty.
Exactly.
Liberty from the king.
Yeah.
Liberty from the religious institutions.
So there's negative liberalism and there's positive liberalism. I think the classical, if I'm remembering this right, that negative liberalism is more of the classical liberalism, where it's liberty from restraint, and
yes.
and the positive liberalism, and these aren't judgments, positive or negative, but positive liberalism is more of a liberty to have self-determination.
Well, that kind of takes us to a balance that I feel is very important. I'd like to know how you feel about it. Oftentimes people appeal to the First Amendment for any number of issues, for either side of which they are promoting.
Sure.
And yet, when we go back to the First Amendment, it seems to reflect what you've just said about freedom from and freedom of.
Yes.
The First Amendment, which says that government shall enact no law establishing a religion or hindering the free exercise thereof.
So there you have the positive and the negative.
And they're balanced.
Yes.
So you don't have a government establishing religion, you don't have a government hindering religion, and you're respecting both sides of that.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that make the founding documents of this country so astoundingly awesome.
So where do we start to differ then? If you and I have an agreement, you as a progressive liberal, me as a conservative libertarian, we both agree in liberty of the individual.
Absolutely.
We both agree in the historic and constitutional basis of this, particularly in the First Amendment and the rights of the First Amendment. Where does that start to differ down the line in terms of institutions, in terms of government, in terms of the role of religion in society?
It's an excellent question, and I think that those differences begin at the very first reading of those things. What is the emphasis? Do you emphasize the freedom to, or do you emphasize the freedom from? And even that debate was obviously there with the Founding Fathers in Philadelphia as they were writing these texts. And it manifests itself as what that document is itself is a compromise of those ideals battling each other, even back then. And so just from the first interpretation of that, we already have some differences on what is more important to me, or how I envision society, or maybe you or somebody else. And this is something I always try to teach my students, is there's more than two sides to any issue. It always makes me want to pull my hair out when somebody says there's two sides to every issue. No, there's manifold sides to every issue.
But let me throw one area of issues out, and that is the size, the scope, the scale of government.
Sure.
One of the ways to talk about the values that I hold to is to say I affirm limited, accountable government. Now, I'm pretty sure that you and I will not have any argument to pick in terms of whether government needs to be accountable to the people.
Certainly.
Absolutely. But perhaps limited. We may see that a little bit differently. The bigger government gets, libertarians tend to think, the smaller individuals get. Leaving people to solve their problems on their own in a robust manner builds a rugged individualism and a great country of great people, rather than a country of people dependent upon the welfare state and so forth.
Yeah, and I think even liberals are very much enamored with the idea of rugged individualism. The question of limited government, of course, depends, as a philosopher, what do you mean by limited? Define the term. And even amongst libertarians and conservatives, there's differences of opinion as to what limited means or should mean.
Now,
any limitation is slavery. I mean, I think it was Rousseau who said, "Man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains." And part of what he's talking about is the individual's constant fight with society, because it's an inevitable kind of paranoia relationship where I have liberty, but in order to have it, I need to have security. And then, what's the legitimacy of power to help protect both of those, and to have them? There's this constant classical debate between the balance of security and liberty.
Absolutely, and we're going to go to a quick break, so I'm going to do something nasty to you.
That's fine.
I'm going to ask you something that can only be answered on a bumper sticker. Is government too big or too small?
Oh, which one?
You can think about that. We'll come back and open up with that. Very good. I'm Keli'i Akina on ThinkTech Hawaii's Hana Kako, a weekly program with my friend Matt Lopresti. We're talking about how we've gotten from philosophy to public policy, and we'll be right back after this short message. I should tell you, Matt is a candidate for the House of Representatives in the 43rd District. 41st District. 41st District in the year 2014 here in Honolulu, Hawaii, and we'll be back right after this.
Aloha, welcome to ThinkTech Hawaii. My name is Josh Green. I'm the host of a program called Healthcare in Hawaii. I'm a physician. I work in the emergency department on the Big Island. I also serve in the state senate, which, please don't hold that against me, doesn't detract from my television program. We speak about all the big healthcare issues in the state. We get together on Tuesdays from 2 o'clock till 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we try to talk about the most important issues in healthcare. This is a terrific venue for people to learn about healthcare. There are many programs on this station. We broadcast it later, not just on the internet, but also on OC16. Thanks for joining us. Please be informed healthcare consumers.
Aloha, this is Keli'i Akina, president of Grassroots Institute, welcoming you back to E Hana Kako on ThinkTech Hawaii. Let me say something about ThinkTech. It was founded by Jay Fidel, a good friend of mine who is the producer of today's program. Jay, thank you very much. You've got a great crew at ThinkTech Hawaii, and anyone watching can view this episode or about 20 hours more of original content produced every week by going to www.thinktechhawaii.com or watching it in one of the broadcast venues. My guest today is Matt Lopresti, a philosopher and an academic who's decided that he would like to give the public in Hawaii the opportunity to put him into office. And we'll see after November the 4th if that's going to be the case. But Matt, I asked you a tough question.
Sure did.
Oftentimes during the political season, I get asked questions. And they're prefaced with, now don't answer this like a politician. Just give me a simple yes or a simple no. But what do you do with a question like this? And I get asked this question often, but how we answer it tells a lot. Is government too big or not big enough?
Well, I'll answer it not like a politician, but like a philosopher. And the way that begins is by asking another question to that question. As again, what do you mean by too big, or what aspect of government, which government? I think we get into trouble really fast, practically speaking, when we become absolutists about anything. If we become absolutists about something has to be smaller no matter what, or bigger no matter what, well, then what does that mean you sacrifice?
Sure.
So, if we're at war, for example, is government going to be too big? If it's a matter of practical salvation of the nation, or the preservation of the Union, as in the Civil War, that question becomes absurd to ask: is government too big? Well, if the goal is preservation of the Union, you do what is necessary, right?
Well, there are certain principles that are necessarily in operation when one runs a household or a business, and certainly a nation. And one of those principles is affordability. From my perspective, I tend to think that there's a lot of very good research that tells us that we're running our governments, whether it's the state government or the federal government, at a cost that is far greater than we can afford. And we're doing things that harm the people and future generations in order to continue affording those things. It's no secret that we have about $40 billion of unfunded public liabilities in terms of state pensions and state health insurance. Right now, in the state of Hawaii, close to $4 trillion nationwide with all the states added up. Would you say in this sense, government may be too big or definitely bigger than it legitimately should be?
I'm sure in some cases there are aspects of government that are too big. Without getting very specific about any one example, I'm sure that's the case. However, it is incorrect, I think, to look at government it is incorrect to look at government as if it's a business. It's not a business.
All right.
It's not interested in making profits. It should be interested in being efficient, absolutely. And obviously, you incentivize efficiency oftentimes with public-private partnerships, and these are ways of being more efficient and innovative. That's good. But, the role of government is to service the people. There isn't usually money in that. A lot of the government services, I always find it confusing and mystifying when I see headlines that talk about something like this sort of government agency operates at a loss. Of course it operates at a loss. But that's only in a matter of dollars and cents. And that's not the point and purpose of government, to make dollars and cents, but rather to provide services, essential services, oftentimes services that are unable or that you have people unwilling to provide to society.
Sure. Well, we'll come back and let me ask you some follow-up questions about the economics of government in a little bit, but let's stay on the subject for a moment. of whether it's government's too big. Another way libertarians and conservatives often think of government as being too big is in terms of its relationship to the liberties of the individual, in terms of whether Big Brother, so to speak, up there is too big, too intrusive into everyday life, too aware of what's going on through monitoring and so forth, to taxing compared to the income we bring in. So it's that relationship between this entity, Big Brother, and the individual's own autonomy. That makes people who are conservative and libertarian somewhat nervous.
It makes liberals extremely nervous too, Keli'i. I mean, there's more areas of disagreement, I think, on issues of taxation, where there are some positions that view any taxation as slavery, and I think that's a bit excessive of a view. But when you get into civil liberties, when you get into rights to privacy, and you look at the bloviated budget that we have for things like the NSA. Why do they need to be monitoring the text that I send? Why do they need to be monitoring the emails that you send? They're in everything now. And it's disturbing that more people aren't disturbed by this. You know, the fact that we have such a huge budget that seems to go in areas that the public have little to no oversight of. And by that I mean, you know, obviously that the Congress should have some oversight and they have the responsibilities, but we as citizens have less and less, I think, transparency as to what is really happening with the size of, say, the national security infrastructure and how that's affecting daily life. I mean, the Fourth Amendment is absolutely clear about having a protection to privacy. Your papers and your personal items are private. And, you know, the fact of the matter is where's my phone? This is now today's papers. These are my papers. Well, but the fact is it ought to be.
Yeah.
And there's private information on here. Nothing I need to hide, but it's private and it's mine. And it's as absurd for the NSA to know exactly what's going on here with my private paperwork or my laptop as it is for them to bust into my house and rifle through my paperwork.
This is quite interesting because it's clearly an area where conservatives and liberals can be lined up together.
Absolutely.
And actually can work together in this area. And oftentimes, in terms of this area, on a national political level, conservatives and liberals are accusing each other of being the perpetrator of the bigness of Big Brother.
That's the game of politics, and that's unfortunate.
And that's not really where the thinking is at in this issue. Let's shift to the economy a little bit.
Okay.
You know that I head a public policy think tank, the Grassroots Institute, and a lot of what we do is economics. Mm-hmm. We tend to hold that freer markets, not absolutely free, but freer markets where the government intervenes less, are more productive for the economy, for businesses, and better for government anyway. And for example, you mentioned the need of government to spend even when it spends at a loss because certain needs don't get met. Let's say, for example, in the social services sector, you know, people perhaps out of the goodness of their heart aren't going to go out there and feed the homeless and build houses for them and all of that, but that's why we may need government. That's one point of view. I tend to think, from a freer market point of view, that when we look at the research across the world, that where government takes less of a role in the economy and the economy performs better, philanthropy takes place. And the private sector tends to, and has for the greater portion of history, tends to take care of those needs along with the religious sector. Now, is that a little too simplistic? But one of the research data, for example, compiled by Stephen Moore, the Wall Street Journal, shows that in all of the economies that have lower involvement of the government in social services, you actually have a higher level of human needs being met because of the prosperity of that nation. Just let me throw that to you, because
I haven't seen that study, and I have some questions about the premises there. I find it morally troubling to think that we should just allow the poor and needy and those who have fallen through the cracks, even though they've tried to do everything that they can and everything they're told to do that's right, that they should be reliant upon the fiat of a rich man. That's morally troubling to think that that's the way we should have our society oriented. Like, I haven't seen that study, but one study I did see today is a study out of Harvard that talks about the disparity between the vastly wealthy and everybody else. You know, with this tremendous income gap. And there are other studies, I guess, to throw studies back at you.
Sure.
Though I haven't seen your studies, I don't know if you've seen the ones I'll refer to, but the more diverse, or I should say, the wider that gap
Certainly.
between the wealthy and everybody else,
Mm-hmm.
the more social injustice. And it's a direct stemming from social inequities. And it is the balancing of government that helps to regulate that growing disparity. Because the less disparity that you have, the better the education.
Yes.
The less disparity you have, the less violence. The less disparity you have, the greater social justice. Now, these aren't necessarily in conflict with one another at all, but I just want to put that out there as well as an alternative approach to the same issues, I think.
Well reflected on. And I actually didn't complete the argument. I just wanted to get the ball rolling.
Sure.
Philanthropy would be part of a civilization or culture that benefited from a more robust economy. But more importantly than that, the capacity to build wealth would be distributed more broadly.
I think that remains to be seen in any society.
But a better, robust economy where you have the freer market, the invisible hand of Adam Smith, working more efficiently, should make it possible for people all along the range of economic levels to grow.
A rising tide. All
That's right.
all that.
And to raise the water level of one boat, raise the water levels of all. So build an economy, and here in Hawaii we have a laboratory, the state of Hawaii, in which we can build an economy with robust small businesses, large business, international business, as a better solution than a welfare state. And it's not so much that I'm trying to argue this now, but point to some of the different tendencies of more conservative thought.
Yeah.
As a foil to more liberal thought, where you've put a little bit, and tell me if I'm wrong, I'm detecting a little bit more of a role morally on the government to really fill the gap there in terms of income inequity.
Absolutely.
As opposed to putting the role back on the market and saying government's interference with the market is what creates the inequity.
There's some truth to both sides.
Okay.
I mean, they're honest as a philosopher,
Why
not
do I
as a
find you
politician.
so reasonable?
But, well, because we've done this for a long time, you and I. But no, there really is some truth to both. Like, I'm no enemy of the free market. I support the free market. I've started businesses of my own. Haven't gone anywhere, but I've started them. I know how difficult it is. The most difficult thing is to meet payroll, and when you're a businessman, or a woman, you have a moral obligation to the employees that you have and their families, and there's real moral goodness in giving to society as an entrepreneur. At the same time, however, there are the realities that society has issues that are not going to be able to be solved by the free market, or that I think shouldn't be left up to the free market, like having welfare for people who are unable to make ends meet, despite their attempts to do so. We've seen this growth of income inequality take off in a tremendous fashion since the 1940s, 1950s. And in that time, the chant from some sides of the political spectrum has been smaller government, starve government, and that will shrink it. And that's been a consistent strategy. And in that time, all we've really seen is a greater and greater disparity of wealth, because that money is going back to the rich who already have the money, more so than anybody else. And ideally, yes, the rising tide raises all boats, sure, ideally. But what's really happening? And I think that the facts meet out that money is not being reinvested in the community, that money is not being reinvested into businesses entirely. It's certainly not going to the working families that inhabit Hawaii or other industrialized modern nations. Instead, it's going into profits for the rich by the rich. But this is important, Keli'i, because we've seen, along with that income growth, that income disparity, that growth, it's not just this side going up, but this side going down in real income. 1970s dollar to today's dollar for a working family, we as working people make less and less and less. And that doesn't make any damn sense because we become more efficient. And as you are more efficient by some of these models, then, so should rise worth and wealth. And that's not happening. And that's why regulation becomes important.
And it's important to understand that causality is so very important. We have to analyze what is the cause of that inequity. What is really driving the...
Yeah, it's more complicated.
That's right.
The causes, there are causes.
And what is the role of the government when we see that the dollar no longer buys what it used to buy and so forth? Could it be the government is getting too big? Now, I know we can't boil it down to an aphorism as simple as Ronald Reagan's, but it's poignant that he said the problem, let's see, what did he say about government? The government is the problem. Our problem is not with government. The government is the problem, and so forth.
Nice catchphrase.
And it is a catchphrase. And what we really have to answer is this question, and we look for causality as philosophers. Is government intervention in the economy causing the economy to be less efficient and less productive? And in what ways? And if we can actually chart that out, we can also have room for what you have spoken of, most importantly, and a moral imperative. And I would have to agree with you there. I would have to agree that it would be immoral for us in our society to stand by while other people without means suffered through no fault of their own. And how we rectify that is perhaps what creates the difference.
And this goes back to the question you asked before we went on a break, is where do we begin to see these differences, say from the Founding Fathers, begin to meet out in the real world? And it's immediately from the interpretation. What is the emphasis? And we can trace these differing perspectives back to differing perspectives on, the amendments to the Constitution, for example.
Very important, and at least we have that as an anchor, the Constitution of the United States.
Yeah.
Now, when our high ideals and lofty thought translate into wearing red or wearing blue on election day, voting for a certain candidate or belonging to a certain party, how much of this idealism actually gets represented? You're a member, I'm sure that you have no qualms about saying it here, of the Democratic Party. You're proud to be part of the Democratic Party.
Yes, I am.
Well, what are the ideals of the Democratic Party that attract you to it?
Well, for the Democratic Party, ideals that resonate with me are emphases on liberty and insofar as it is about freedom to have the ability to have self-determination. The positive liberty side that we were talking about before. I can't think of a catchy way to put it, but it's about the ability to know that I have freedom from anxiety, freedom from want, because I have certain protections that government provides for me and my family, and that if I do things right by my employer and I do things right by my government, that I will be able to afford a place to have and call my own. I will be able to afford to raise children.
Would this be the freedom from?
Basically.
Freedom.
No, it's freedom to, really. I mean, it's a combination.
So
it's always a combination.
Well, we'll come back and we'll start right
take a
at
break
the
again?
beginning of the next segment, fleshing that out just a little bit. Keli'i Akina with Matt Lopresti here, talking about how we got from philosophy to politics. And we'll be right back on ThinkTech Hawaii's A Hana Kako program right after this short break. Don't go away.
Hi, I'm Jay Fidel. That's Ted Ralston. Ted is the host of Where the Road Leads. It shows every Friday from 4 to 5 p.m. It's about technology. It's about how people collaborating and solve problems with modern technology. It's where the road leads. We all know that. We should all be listening. Join us there, 4 to 5 p.m. every Friday. Now, what about that do you agree with?
All of it.
I knew he'd say that. Aloha. Say aloha.
Aloha.
Good.
Welcome back to A Hana Kako. Today I've been talking with Matt Lopresti, a philosopher turned politician, but never stops being a philosopher. And we're going to wrap up our segment here today. Matt, you mentioned that one of the fundamental values for you as a Democrat is liberty of the individual. Freedom from things that would prevent that liberty, and the freedom to do things to enhance that and build. Well, what else is key to being a Democrat?
Well, I know that as a Democrat, I'm valued as an individual, as a human being. That, personhood means me, a living breathing human being, not necessarily, say, a corporation. Nothing wrong with corporations. I'm not some pinko commie. I recognize the value of corporations, but they're not people. And what we have in this society is more and more of an emphasis on the personhood of, say, corporations, from the 14th Amendment, which was written to free slaves, and it's been expanded and corrupted to include corporate personhood, as if they have the same rights and have none of the responsibilities that I have as a human being. And I think part of the liberal thrust of the argument and the debate in this country is about renewing faith in the individual, renewing strength in the individual American worker and the individual American families to be able to have self-determination, to be successful if they do what is, the American dream. If they do all that it seems you're supposed to do to have the American dream and have a house and 2.2 kids and 2 cars and all that jazz. If you play by the rules, that you should be able to be successful. I think that the Democratic Party stands for that. As difficult as it's become, you have to have 2 professional high salaries in the state just to be middle class. And it's just not affordable. It's not Pono either. And I think that the Democratic Party fights more for the working family, whereas other ideologies tend to emphasize a different.
Well, that's very interesting. As I'm listening to you, and as I've listened to the heartbeats of many of the Republicans that I know, there's not a lot of difference at the value side. When we think of the individual and the individual liberty, we can go back to Abraham Lincoln, or we can even go to Prince Kuhio, and we're talking about tremendous strides for humanity toward civil rights, which is something that obviously you embrace as a Democrat, but is part of classical Republican stance as well. I think where I'm hearing some differentiation is when you start talking about people versus corporations. And it could be that Republicans will tend to regard corporations as being the rights of individuals to use their finances in such a way to create these instruments, and see the government as oppressive to that and so forth. You would see the government as actually propping that up over and against individualism. But I think that the values, particularly of individual liberty, the rule of law, the opportunity of everyone, line up. So here's my thought. My thought is that the way in which those values get expressed is the real problem that we have. And they may show some deeper value structures. I think that conservatives often look at Democrats and say, you are tax and spend liberals. That you think everybody should have these goodies, therefore we have to tax them. And so the theme in that is no regard for the cost of things. And that's a stereotype, of course.
Yeah, it's a caricature. It's a total caricature. This tax and spend liberal thing. Yeah, we need roads, we need sewers, we need education. The Constitution requires an education, and those things cost money. And teachers in the in Hawaii make the least of any other teacher in the United States. They're not the worst teachers, but they get paid the least.
Sure.
It costs money to have a 21st century society that has the infrastructure that allows businesses to succeed, that allows businesses to have the workforce they need to succeed, that allows for all of us to have a comfortable quality of life.
And I would say that is a caricature. Another caricature going the other direction would be that Republicans are the wealthy, that the Republicans have no connection to the working class. I live in Hawaii, except for a few Republicans who live in Hawaii, who actually aren't as wealthy as people think they are. I really can't tell the difference of wealth between my Republican friends and Democrat friends. It seems to be a lot of factors other than the political party that determines wealth and so forth.
That's one of the great things about Hawaii is what makes a Republican here, a Democrat here, a Libertarian, is different than the mainland.
Well, let me close with this, because we've only got a minute left.
Sure.
How can we forge a better future, Republicans and Democrats, working for the most noble of values?
By having more conversations like this, by having these kinds of conversations that hopefully spawn other conversations, not just here on the television or on the internet, and not just in the classroom, but out there in community meetings, out there when people testify on bills. You don't see debate in the State House. You see testifying, and then the decisions are made
You
elsewhere.
mean hearings aren't an opportunity to debate issues and hold up the best ideas so that they win
It's
ultimately?
theater. It's theater. Government has become theater, and we need debate to have a robust society.
A Democrat in a Democrat-dominated state saying government is just theater. Do you want me to let your party people know that?
I think there's enough realpolitik out there that I think they understand what I mean by
Yes,
that.
I
And it's not an indictment necessarily, but it is really a cry for greater debate from government with the people to find the best avenue forward.
Matt Lopresti,
Aloha.
thank you.
Thank
Great
you.
thoughts. Love chatting with you. The only thing that's different than our usual chats is we're not sitting with a cup of coffee close to midnight.
Aloha.
Aloha. My guest today has been Matt Lopresti, a philosophy professor, but someone actively engaged as an activist in our community running for office. And I hope you've enjoyed our interaction, talking about everything from liberal progressive thought to conservative and libertarian thought. I'm Keli'i Akina with the Grassroots Institute, signing off for ThinkTech Hawaii. Until next week, aloha.